Hello rockstars, I'm the Commander Theorist and welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. Today I want to talk about something that's been driving me rather crazy, the Commander 2018 Precon decks, or more precisely the absolute lack of any details on Commander 2018. So this year's Precon releases on August 10th, and the 4 decks will each cost $39.99 US, which is a slight raise from previous installments. And that's all we know about this year's decks, which, given the amount of pre-planning I like to do for these Precon sets, is putting me in a bit of a pinch. Last year, we knew early on that we were going to be getting tribal-themed decks, and this wasn't from the leaks that had happened. So at the very least, we knew to expect Tribal Matters to be a big thing in the set, and so we could prep by looking at some tribal support cards like Coat of Arms, Descendants Path. But this year we have nothing. N-O-T thing. And that puts me in a bit of a pickle. This was actually going to be a video where I talk about some cards you should consider picking up in preparation for Commander 2018. But unfortunately, as I have zero information to go off of other than a random splash page on Wizards' page, we're going to have to do something different. Instead, I'm going to give my suggestions for cards that I hope see a reprint in Commander 2018. There are tons of cards that see so much play in so many Commander decks, but for one reason or another, the supply of them just isn't there to meet the demand. And with a reprint in a Commander Precon, players who want those cards might be able to gain access to them. So let's talk about some possible reprints. Tap that like button and let's begin. Perhaps my biggest gripe with a lot of Commander Precons is the usage of certain ramp spells over others. We've seen cards like Cultivate and Kodama's Reach see inclusion in many of these Precon decks. But Nature's Lore, a card that I have personally grown to prefer 10 times out of 10 over all of those, and Rampant Growth, which is effectively a clone of it, it's a very good ramp spell and it's never been in a Commander Precon. In fact, the last seen printing of it was in Garruk vs. Liliana, a dual deck from quite some time ago. Its ability is deceptively good. It lets you tutor a land that's a forest untapped. It does not restrict you to simply basic lands, so this can get at your shock lands and your dual lands so long as they have a forest typing. Heck, even Dryad Arbor can be tutored out for this. I'm not saying I would want them to include those kinds of lands in the deck, but this comment can easily be slipped in instead of another Cultivate, and it'll get you on the track to tune your deck further. Eternal Witness is a staple recursion card. This 3-drop creature lets you return any card from your graveyard to your hand. That's pure value. This card's last appearance was in the Commander 2015 Precon decks, not counting anthology reprints. This is the kind of recursion that is so very not narrow that it can fit into more than just graveyard themed strategies. Heck, nearly every deck that runs green can benefit from running the Witness, and I'm hoping that they choose to include it in at least one Precon deck this year. Supreme Verdict. This is perhaps the best generic 4-drop board wipe in Commander. It does put you at the very least in Azorius colors, but is an uncounterable board wipe, and it's nothing to scoff at. This card has never seen inclusion in a Commander Precon, and I personally think is well worth consideration. I'm fine with other board wipes like Decree of Pain, but the majority of the Precon board wipes that we've seen have either been in black, like the Decree of Pain, or are so blatantly overcosted that they will not see a whole lot of play. I also very much like the uncounterable nature of this card. If it's cast, it's resolving and the board will be cleared of creatures. And quite frankly, that's a very powerful ability to have. A classic Selesnya token staple. Aura Shards is a 3-drop enchantment, is incredibly valuable for decks that need some artifact and enchantment removal. This card's last printing was in the original Precon Commander decks, 2011. And given the value that this brings to the deck that runs it, which actually do not have to be token decks, any creature-based deck that gets feet on the ground can get some value out of this card. It's a shame that not one Precon deck since Counterpunch has included this. Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. So I included the two of these on the same spot just because they are so gosh darn similar. Both of these enchantments force opponents to sacrifice a creature whenever one of your creatures dies. The Dictate has flashed and their mana costs are slightly different, but the functionality remains the same. The most recent printing of either of these two was the Dictate inclusion in Journey to Nyx. Both of these offer a lot of board control for opponents as creatures, and it's something that definitely could be used in a wide array of strategies. Purphoros, God of the Forge. This is one card I actually predict will see an inclusion to some extent this year. In Commander 2016, we saw that Iroas, the God of Victory, got a reprint, and given the sheer popularity of this particular god in many red decks, from Goblin decks to general token decks that run red, Purphoros is Impact Tremors after Leg Day. Again, this card was only ever printed once in Theros, and the majority of its play is seen in Commander, where it is an absolute bomb. I would be shocked to see this not get a reprint in the coming Precons, as the demand for this card is causing that price of it to crest over $20 now. And I actually think this is the most currently expensive and popular of the Theros block gods. Exploration. So this card is almost a meme by my channel standards. I have yearned for a reprint of this one-drop enchantment for years. It's a very open-ended inclusion, being viable in just about any deck running green to any capacity. Giving you an extra land drop each turn gives you the kind of ramp that will really help you grow out of control. We got a reprint of Burgeoning back in Commander 2016, which is kinda similar, but we've had no reprints of this card since the original Conspiracy. I think this card sees a little bit of play in some older formats, I don't know, but this is a staple ramp spell in green decks in Commander that I really could use a reprint this year. Wizards, please give me my Exploration reprint. I'll never whine about another card again, I swear! So, the Archangel of Thune is one of the few cards that have made this list that I feel is a little more specific to a niche strategy. Life gain is the main gimmick of this card, but that life gain is then transferred into +1/+1 counters being distributed across the board. I really like this card, as its ability is invaluable in powering up your team. She has flying along with her lifelink, giving her really good evasion, and her ability just triggers off of life gain in general, so a token deck with her and say a Soul Sister or two will give you a ton of counters. I am hoping that Wizards is genuinely looking at some of the cards that are very popular in the format and consider including some cards that have a pretty hefty enough price tag to make the Precons, which are already well worth the money, a little more valuable. Alrighty, so the classic Chromatic Lantern has a little bit of stipulations to it. As I've grown as a Commander player, I've noticed that the more fine-tuned that a deck mana base becomes, the less you actually need the Lantern. If you should manage to get the types of dual lands and mana fixing among your ramp spells and fetches, the value of this card does begin to decline. But that being said, Commander Precons will never, ever include the optimal fetches like Windswept Heath or Shocklands, just due to their humongous popularity across other formats and them wanting to refrain from putting anything a little too spicy for other formats in a deck meant for Commander. Sort of like how we've never seen anything else along the lines of True Name Nemesis in a Precon deck since that fiasco. But the Chromatic Lantern is a very good crutch of sorts for players who maybe don't have the most ideal mana base to help fix their mana. I personally use it in a great many of my decks just because the majority of my decks, I don't have optimized mana bases. And so this card lets me make do with what I have without too much sacrifice. We saw it get a reprint in one of the Commander Precons of 2016, and I will say that while that was a great card to include, it was frustrating that it was only included in the Yidris deck. Like, come on Wizards, you left it out of the other 4 decks, they all could have used the mana fixing. This card. Felt like making a 90s sitcom joke here, but I'll spare you the cringe today and just say, I really feel that there's no excuse why Cyclonic Rift does not make it into more Commander Precon decks. This is without a doubt one of the best pieces of removal to ever stumble blindly into our format. At its worst, it can plink one little pest off the board. And at its best, it wins you the game by making sure that you're the only one left with a board state. On EDHRec.com, which is where I used a lot of information to come up with the cards on this list, this card is the second most popular card in Commander, second only to Sol Ring. And it's only seen a few reprints in Commander 2014 and then again in Modern Masters 2017. I don't actually think it's played in Modern, but I could be wrong. But this is the kind of very powerful card that should be considered for a Precon appearance. Now, these are just some of the cards that I'm surprised have not seen more inclusion in more Commander Precons. I'm not an expert in other formats, but I really feel that for the vast majority of these cards, Commander is really the only format that they see heavy play. I would think it'd be a disservice by Wizards to refuse to reprint certain cards that have a lot of value in Commander in the Precons. I love the Precons, don't get me wrong. I feel that they're a great tool to help someone get into the Commander format from absolute scratch or to strike out on a new tangent. They're the only thing from Wizards right now that they offer in terms of a Precon theme deck that you can actually play and win right out of the box. I don't think there's another product for Magic the Gathering that can follow up on that promise the same way that a Commander Precon does. The decks also have been bumped up by a few dollars this year, likely in part due to being there only 4 decks rather than the 5 that were the mainstay number until 2017. Now I get it, you've got one less deck on the shelves and you need to bring in those sales. But give us customers a little something too. If I'm dishing out $40 for a Precon deck, I kind of expect to get an equal value for my money. And I know Wizards has been good on including some really good cards in the Precon decks, but I feel that they're really overlooking certain gems in the format that see play, but they're just not in enough printings to make them readily available to the rest of us. Now I want to open up the floor to you. What kind of cards do you want to see in this year's Precon decks and why? Do you think the cards I talked about are the ones that you would also like to see? I hear spoiler season begins later this week for Commander 2018. So hopefully I can get this video up and out the door in time to make it slightly relevant. Fingers crossed. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll tap that like button to let others know it's well worth a watch. Subscribe with notifications turned on to keep up to date with all future uploads because YouTube's notification system sucks. If you want to help us up the ante in terms of video quality, consider becoming a patron over at our Patreon. And as always, I hope you ladies, gentlemen, and my NB friends have a lovely rest of the day, and I'll catch you all at the next upkeep.